Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth session of the Infrastructure and Nature webinar series. We're working our way through the infrastructure life cycle through 6 sessions over the course of 2 months. So far, we've explored planning, policy, finance, and today we've reached the design and innovation phase with a focus on engineering with nature. My name is Kate Newman. I'm Vice President for Sustainable Infrastructure at WWF in the United States. Last year, a group of individuals from over 20 organizations ranging from NGOs to companies to multilateral development banks and research institutions came together to co-host a week-long pavilion at the IUCN World Conservation Congress. The topic was, how can we deliver the infrastructure we need while restoring biodiversity, building resilience, creating a just and carbon neutral future? One of the themes of the Congress is economic and financial systems. How can we support human livelihoods and economic development while sustaining nature? Infrastructure is at the foundation of economic development, and the private sector has had a central role in creating the infrastructure we need. This pavilion was designed to explore how the private sector, civil society, government, and the NGO community can work together to reimagine 2 things. How can we develop the built infrastructure of the future to ensure a healthy planet and thriving communities? And second, how can we both protect and support nature's engineering that continues to provide essential infrastructure services or nature-based solutions, the focus of today's discussion. So in spite of the delays brought around by the pandemic this year, critical deliberations continue on global agreements like the Conventions on Biological Diversity and Climate Change. So along with the World Conservation Congress, all of these are now taking place in 2021. So our group decided to go on ahead and start the discussions for the Congress and hold a virtual pavilion over these 2 months. The discussions to date have been absolutely fascinating, I think, and the session today will be really exciting. We have a terrific lineup of inspiring speakers, so get your questions ready and let's get started. We have a technical glitch, I believe is still technical. Nope, we have solved the technical problems. This is Zoom land, so you never know what's going to happen. We are going to be moderated. Our session will be moderated today by Lynn Scarlett. Former Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior, Lynn is the Global External Affairs Officer at the Nature Conservancy. She's overseeing corporate engagement, the Impact Investing Program, and public policy. She chaired the Science Advisory Board of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from 2014 to 2019, and is a member of the National Academy of the Sciences Sustainability Roundtable. And she's also served as a co-lead author of the 2014 National Climate Assessment. So if all Zoom challenges have been met, I think we'll see Lynn come on board.
Yep. I'm here.
Yay, Lynn, great to have you. So take it away, let's get going.
All right, well, welcome everybody. And if we could bring the slides up, that would be great. I'm going to apologize in advance if somehow I get kicked off Zoom again. My colleague Linda Kruger will take over, but let's hope that that does not happen. So welcome to this program in the series on engineering with nature. Let's get right in, turn to the next slide. I want to set the context for why now, why are we thinking about engineering with nature? All of us understand the world around us is changing, the threats are severe, the stakes are high, whether it's extreme instances of flooding, drought, catastrophic wildland fires, so much more. We simply open the headlines and we see daily the challenges around the globe. Next, we really face a triple crisis, a climate emergency, biodiversity loss, and a health pandemic. All of these come together such that nature can help as a solution to address these issues. Next slide. Our challenge then is, how can nature's solutions help provide safe, prosperous communities and healthy ecosystems? That will be the central discussion today. You'll hear examples, you'll hear issues, you'll hear challenges and ways to address those challenges. Next slide. Just one example to bring this down to earth. Think about coastal natural infrastructure. At the Nature Conservancy, we've done a lot of science around coastal systems and how nature can actually help to reduce risks to local communities, reducing wave energy, reducing wave height, reducing the impacts of storms, erosion, and flooding in coastal communities, and at the same time, providing benefits. For example, improved habitat for oysters and other fisheries, and much more. So one of the benefits of nature solutions is that, yes, they can serve as infrastructure, but also provide additional benefits. Next slide. Of course, when we think about driving natural infrastructure and engineering with nature, this is a proposition that requires thinking about performance of those systems, the value, that is, what's the cost effectiveness and other economic benefits of those systems, and what are the enabling conditions. And that means looking at ecology, hydrology, oceanography, engineering, environmental economics, social sciences, behavioral economics, political science, and much more. You'll hear from the speakers contributions and thoughts about each of those in various ways. Next slide. So again, to summarize, when we think about investing in nature-based solutions, you'll hear a lot of terminology. Natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions, engineering with nature, but they all center around the idea that nature has a role to play in improving resilience on coasts, in addressing and reducing flood impacts and flood risks to communities, and so much more. But there are a lot of questions. Performance. Where and when do these systems help reduce risk and provide other benefits? How do they interact with built systems, that is, hybrid systems that use gray infrastructure and nature systems? Value. What's the economic proposition and non-economic value of nature to businesses and communities? And finally, what are the enabling conditions? What behaviors, practices, enabling policies need to be encouraged or changed? What procurement practices might need to be changed? So next slide. These are the opportunities and challenges that we'll be exploring. We'll be looking at engineering and ecology, why engineer with nature, dive deeper onto that topic, building back better. And so with that, I want to dive right in and introduce our opening panel. We have a lot to cover, so my apologies in advance. We're going to go straight through the first two presentations and then our panel, and at the end, in the last 15 minutes or so, open up for questions and comments. So let me begin by introducing our first keynote speaker, Richard Foreman. Richard is Professor of Advanced Environmental Studies in the field of landscape ecology, emeritus, at Harvard, and he's going to talk about the importance of mitigation measures and the link between engineering and ecology. He will be followed up right away by Todd Bridges, who is Senior Research Scientist of Environmental Science at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Todd will give an introduction to nature-based solutions and the importance of engineering with nature. He has led that effort at the Army Corps of Engineers for the last decade or so. So Richard, over to you. And Richard, you need to go off mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And I happen to like the term nature-based solutions. And what I'm going to talk about is really a hybrid of that, of engineering and ecology, focused on road ecology, as you can see in the image here. I think nature and biodiversity and the land are degrading by three overriding processes. And we're all familiar because of the press with urbanization effects and with climate change effects. And I would add the third big one is what I call blinkerism, namely that people, the actions of people with blinkers or tunnel vision maybe, but that we overlook the effects of what we do or ignore the effects. So for example, economists talk about externalities, social scientists talk about environmental injustice. Ecologists see fish loss from logging. The loggers don't worry about the fish. Phosphorus eutrophication from agriculture, loss of bird diversity from traffic noise. And so I'm going to focus more on the road ecology, a field that started up in the 1990s in Netherlands and Europe and the USA. And it coalesced with this book that's illustrated here in 2003, a group of ecologists, engineers, and transportation experts. And two things have happened since that book came out in 2008. Two things have happened big in the last decade. One is the publication, and if we could have the next slide, publication of this book in 2015 by an Australian, a North American, and a European. And this is a very international book, and it has really gone from early studies and so on to really solid studies. So there's good science now in those two books, and they're sort of the handbooks we have on our shelves. The second big thing that happened was an acceleration of the projects and mitigation projects, for example, but also planning projects for nature-based solutions worldwide. So transportation agencies now standardly look at these things. So here's an example of a road, a highway west of Boston in Massachusetts, USA. There's an underpass down there, and we could have the next one. And I'll get back to that underpass, but I just want to show you, this is one of the big effects of transportation, ecological effects. And this is effects of traffic noise on the vertical axis. I'm sorry, traffic noise and distance on the vertical axis. I'm sorry, distance is a horizontal axis. The vertical axis is the number of vehicles per day. So at the top, it says a few thousand vehicles, no effect, significant effect. And it goes on down to more and more traffic, and the significant effect, the bottom, the multi-lane highway, the more than 30,000 vehicles per day, there's significant effect out for 1,200 meters, both on the occasional presence of conservation species birds and also the regular breeding of them. And the next one, please. And that's looking into that underpass. And so we have this particular area, we have, that's, oh my, it's 8 feet wide and 6 feet high. I'm sorry about that. We have 6 of these in 5 miles along this 4-lane road. Next one, please. And this is a large predator, not very large, bobcat. It's a lynx species, and it was filmed. A camera picked it up going through one of our underpasses there, one of the 6 underpasses. The next one, please. So I just want to show you, look at down at the bottom of this, the 3 levels there, and the number of individual animal crossings based on camera data in one of the tunnels. Just to illustrate, the first year there were 33 animals that went through the tunnel. Now there were probably 5-6 times that number of animals that used the tunnel, sometimes to go in, sometimes to hide, I don't know. But 33 went through the second year, it doubled. 67. Third year, it doubled again, the third year. The number of individual animals. The second line says the number of species crossing. Not many the first year, but then a lot in the year 2 and 3. So more than 30 species. And then at the bottom, those are first two were camera data. The bottom are track data. We also track the data. And you'll notice there that that didn't change. The next one, please. So the animals, this is just an illustration of a whole lot of mitigation structures that involve nature and involve engineering up top and so on. Canada, the Netherlands, and more, and Australia and other places. The next one. So I want to now jump to Costa Rica. And this is Hacienda Baru, south of San Jose. And there's a highway going, the road going through there, 2-lane road. Next one, please. And there are some underpasses and there's some structures that have been built for the wildlife to get across. And so here's a white-faced capuchin monkey, a coati, and the next one, just to illustrate some of the animals there. And so in this case, there's 2.5 kilometers of 2-lane road. There are 21 underpasses, quite amazing for unique reasons. They're about 120 meters apart. And you can see these are mid-size and large vertebrates here. And so the next one, please. So they have two others. So those underpasses look similar to the ones in Massachusetts. They also have some what we call canopy bridges. They go across from the canopy one side. They're sort of in the shape of a horizontal ladder. And they also have some zigzag bridges where they zigzag big rope, like what you tie ships to the dock, and they zigzag that across over the road. And what I want to show you is down at, let's see, where are we? In the middle, 11 species only go through the underpass. And then below that, 2 species only go through the ladder, use that ladder bridge to go over. And 3 species only use the zigzag bridge. And so one of the things we've learned from these kinds of studies is that there's something about how far apart they need to be under the structures. And also in this case, you need a number of types. The next one, please. And so they're looking ahead. This is the road effect zone. It says that in the gray area, those are the environmental effects, and that's the area transportation is responsible for, and society outside of that. The next one, please. No, well, that's all right. Yeah, next one there. And this just maps a road effect zone for 25 kilometers west of Boston. Another thing for the future is to develop lightweight overpasses. In other words, the weight of water constrains our overpasses. Lightweight ones like what children use to cross over highway. Another is to plan and create road networks. The next one. And road networks. There are different ways of doing that. And the next one, another is whenever there's a you're affecting the road bed or a new bridge or updating a bridge, that's an opportunity to address other issues of society like wildlife crossing or bikeway or connecting 2 communities that are split before. And finally, this is an illustration to begin seriously designing transportation systems for the era after cars and after roads. And this is published in the journal Solutions in 2011. And so in essence, road ecology and nature-based solutions are really effective in decreasing degradation of biodiversity, nature, and land. Thank you very much.
Todd, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a bit while we're getting the video sorted out?
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as Lynn introduced, I lead the Engineering with Nature initiative within the Army Corps of Engineers. Here's the first slide. And I'd also like to say I've put copies of the slides that I'm showing right now on our Engineering with Nature website under the news item for today's event, if anybody would like a copy of those. If you can just go to the next slide, please. We built a lot of stuff around the world that we call infrastructure in the 20th century. These are statistics for the United States, of course. And this infrastructure really enables what we consider to be, modern civilization. It's quite important to us in many respects. One of the challenges that we're confronting is that this infrastructure, in many cases, is exceeding its design life. It was built a long time ago, and the signs of age are showing. The World Economic Forum has estimated that over the next 20 years, by about mid-century, more than $100 trillion will be invested in infrastructure worldwide. When we look at this infrastructure, these examples on the slide, we also see that it represents a lot of concrete, rock, asphalt, and steel. So when we think about infrastructure as it'll be developed in the 21st century, what will it look like? What will its components be? And many of us hope to see more nature integrated into infrastructure in this century. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why we need innovation in infrastructure is represented in this slide that Lynn already introduced, the hazards that confront us in society and that infrastructure must confront directly. And there are lots of disasters and lots of hazards represented on this slide, and they all have connections to infrastructure. But when we think about these challenges, how do we move beyond this? If you consider just the climate and weather-related disasters in the United States over the last 40 years, since 1980, they produced more than $1.5 trillion in damage. So what are the opportunities for us to incorporate innovation and nature into infrastructure and to reduce that cost going forward? Next slide, please. So within the Army Corps of Engineers, we started an initiative that we call Engineering with Nature in 2010, 10 years ago. This is our anniversary. It is a collection of technical activities that include advancing science and engineering to enable these kinds of projects where we align natural systems and engineering systems to create efficiencies, to create sustainable infrastructure, to deliver a broader range of benefits through that. We've had a number of pilot and demonstration projects building upon past practice, and a range of collaboration and communication activities. Communication is so important to this. We launched this year our Engineering with Nature podcast series, just concluded our 10th episode last week, which you can access via Apple or on our website. 2 years ago, we published a book, Engineering with Nature, an atlas that includes 57 projects from around the world illustrating this practice in fully mature form. And we're going to publish the second volume of this book in just a couple of months. Next slide, please. We're seeking triple bottom line. We're seeking, triple wins. We want to expand the value proposition from investment in infrastructure. If we're going to see $100 trillion of investment in infrastructure, how can we increase the return on that investment in the form of not only economic and engineering value, but also environmental and social value? We can engineer on nature, maybe as reflected by our approach to infrastructure development in the 20th century. We can engineer for nature, like an ecosystem restoration project, but this is where prepositions are important and why we capitalize the W in our Engineering with Nature initiative, is we want to engineer with nature to reveal this triple bottom line. And we have a lot of bridging to do, pun intended, with respect to organizational boundaries and missions, and also diversifying the way we finance these projects. But we need to deliver not only the economics of infrastructure, but also the environmental value for biodiversity and threatened endangered species like interior least term listed here, which we are successfully delisting through a collaboration between the Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or for human well-being. Next slide, please. There are a lot of project examples that we've shown. I've highlighted one here. The late 1990s, our New Orleans district within the Army Corps of Engineers changed the way, made some innovations in the way it was managing sediment out of the navigation channel on the Atchafalaya River by simply supplying that sediment back into the river itself. And you can see that in the upper two left photographs. So they provided the material in the form of sediment, and the river itself engineered, if you will, or constructed its own mid-river island feature. 85 acres, 35 hectares roughly, of a diverse assemblage of native flora and fauna, producing environmental and social benefits, but also engineering benefits, because when this mid-river island developed, it changed the hydrology in this portion of the river such that this portion of the river moves sediment more efficiently, so that now we have to dredge less often to maintain navigation. And we save several $millions a year in lower operational costs. This is truly an example of the triple bottom line. Next slide, please. On a different scale, in respect to national security, Tyndall Air Force Base was devastated by Hurricane Michael in 2018. And we're currently investing $5 billion to reconstruct, to rebuild this Air Force base. And as a part of that rebuild process, we're considering and implementing nature-based solutions. They have a beautifully diverse landscape at Tyndall that we are wanting to enhance through beach and dune and island construction and restoration projects and wetland and reef projects to build additional resilience to support the mission at Tyndall Air Force Base. And you can hear Brigadier General Patrice Melanson talk about this project on episode 3 of our Engineering with Nature podcast. Next slide, please. On another dimension of this idea of collaboration and co-development of solutions, which is so key to advancing practice in this regard. After Hurricane Sandy in 2012, a group of federal and state agencies and the private sector and NGOs got together really to deliver first of their kind projects for the state of New Jersey in the form of natural infrastructure, island and wetland construction projects. And this group is doing fantastic with years of developing this co-development approach. Next slide, please. On even a larger scale, for the last decade or more, our Mobile district in the Corps of Engineers has really been developing great examples in a larger network of nature-based solutions to support the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. This sort of unsung, more or less, case example is something that many could emulate, and I would recommend people to look to this example. The next slide. As we consider how to move forward in innovating practice and infrastructure development, we really do need to figure out how to synchronize policy development, engagement and partnering, research, of course, on-the-ground projects and demonstrations to persuade, and strategic communications, because we have so many audiences we need to speak to advance practice. And finally, the last slide, we are seeking a rebalancing of nature and engineering. We have transformed landscapes all around the world, in the United States, of course, over the last century or more, in how we've engineered. Whether you consider the Duwamish River in the state of Washington or the San Joaquin Valley, where I herald from, we have transformed our landscapes through engineering. How do we rebalance? And that really requires us to think carefully about coordinating this evolution in societal values we see underway now, policy, legacies, and time lags, the process of innovation itself, and how we actually will collaborate across boundaries between organizations as well as disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd. We're now going to turn to our panel. You heard from Todd and Richard some very specific and practical applications of engineering with nature, and yet they do remain underutilized across the globe. Underutilized partly because of lack of understanding of the full range of benefits. You've heard a little bit about that. Partly because of the absence of relevant policies and incentives to drive decision-making in this direction. In some cases, challenges with financing. But there are enormous opportunities. You've glimpsed those opportunities. So I want to turn to our panelists. We have 5 panelists. Each is going to speak in succession. I will not introduce them in between the sessions. I'll introduce them all right now. And then at the end of the 5 presentations, we'll open up for questions. But please do use the Q&A function to put questions, and we'll utilize those to anticipate the question and answer period. So our panelists include Chris Liban, I hope I pronounced that right, Chris, Mark Way, John Phillips-Bum, Meg Geeker and Richard Buggen. I'm just going to give a brief intro of them. Dr. Laban is an internationally recognized expert in the field of resource management, clean technologies, transportation, environment, and sustainability. He is currently the Chief Sustainability Officer at the LA County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Mark is with the Nature Conservancy. He is our global coastal risk and resilience team lead. And then we have John Phillipsbaum, who is currently AECOM's Climate Adaptation Practice Director for the Americas. He advises clients on the strategic integration of climate change into planning, project development, and management decisions. He's also AECOM's partner with the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And then we have Meg, who is the Senior Coastal Scientist with Moffett and Nichol, a coastal engineering and science consulting firm where she works on state, federal, and NGO partnerships in the northern Gulf of Mexico to develop and implement large-scale oyster, marsh, and seagrass restoration. And then Richard Buggen is the monitoring and evaluation manager at the Nature Conservancy in South Africa. And he's part of a team who track the impact of interventions that are applied through source water protection initiatives. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to start the panel, and then we'll just go straight from one to the other. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. What I wanted to do is essentially walk through some of the best practices we have here in Los Angeles, best practices we use in our capital programs, as well as us thinking about, how to incorporate nature-based solutions in our projects. Next slide, please. So LA Metro, for those who may not be familiar with our organization, we're the region's transportation and transit planner and funder. We fund transportation projects. We are the builders, we design, construct, and then we also operate the transportation system here in Los Angeles. Multimodal, bike share, we have buses, trains, and soon enough, some additional modes that we're thinking about coming out of this pandemic. And then at the bottom of this slide is pretty much our more information about our agency. We operate approximately 4,800 square miles, I should say, of area. It's approximately 12,000 square kilometers across the region. Next slide, please. We're creating an impact here in Los Angeles. We have a $140 billion program in terms of our capital investments. We incorporate environmental justice principles. We have what we call an equity platform. And personally, I am part of many circles, not only here in Los Angeles, but across the globe. And I provide and I include many of the principles and ideas on equity, diversity, and inclusion into our projects that I learned from the Global South. We build coalitions. We essentially look at our stakeholders to provide us with input on what we can incorporate in our projects. And we invest in our communities through education. We partner up with the U.S. Green Building Council. We partner up with the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure and provide this information to our stakeholders so that we all have a common understanding of what we're trying to build, what we're trying to do as an organization, and what we're trying to do with the community. Next slide, please. Post-COVID-19, most of us here in Los Angeles, and I'm sure around the world, everything has changed. The baseline conditions in terms of the assumptions, as well as the techniques and methods of planning, constructing, and operating our systems have changed. Our ridership is down. We're losing a lot of money in terms of our revenues. Sales tax is a major component of our finance mechanisms here in Los Angeles. And it forces us to think innovatively, not only on the finance part, but also in building our infrastructure. We've been doing this anyway because for the most part, our program here relative to climate change and adaptation mitigation to environmental impacts been going on for the last decade. And because of the pandemic, we need to innovate. And then the last part here is pretty much we have an LA, what we call an LA Metro Recovery Task Force, and this is part of reinventing and rethinking about our transportation system. Next slide, please. Considerations, something that folks may not necessarily be doing in terms of the pre-development phase of a project. What are the effects of infrastructure to the environment? That's pretty normal here in Los Angeles, here in California. There's always an analysis to do so before the project is actually executed. But lately, what are the effects of environment infrastructure? All hazards assessments now a common thing here. Adaptation, mitigation, and resiliency strategies are part and parcel of the conversation. And so therefore, allowing us to work with nature, allowing us to work with the conditions that exist now and how they're going to change in the future certainly is a big part of the thinking and rethinking process in our projects. Next slide. Adaptive design is our policy, a policy that we have adopted here in Los Angeles. We have accepted the fact that we cannot be ahead of the climate information. Information and data is always coming in. Models are always in development. And so therefore, because we have a $140 billion program here in the organization, here in LA, to expand our system, we need to build whatever we are building right now according to what we know. And then in the future, as climate information is coming up and developing, we are also aware that we need to make changes and adjustments to those particular designs and efforts. Next slides, please. I won't go much into this. This is our process in terms of our sustainability plan. It's required in every project. And suffice to say with this particular slide that we coordinate really well with our contractor. Next slide. Next slide. In the series of slides, I just wanted to give you some examples of what we've done in terms of nature-based solutions. This is something that we have done in one of our operating divisions. We put in impermeable pavement to replace asphalt so that we will allow infiltration in this area that floods often. Next slide, please. And then similar here in this community, it floods all the time. So what we have done is that we're coordinating with the city of Los Angeles and essentially putting in this landscape area, extensive landscape area around our station, not only to capture the flooding in this area, but also to infiltrate and replenish the underlying groundwater. Next slide. This one and the next slide, all I'm going to say really here is that, this particular example, we've had, we look at how nature interacts with our infrastructure, and we are redesigning our infrastructure accordingly. So in this particular case, we inverted pretty much the circular structure there so that when birds perch on this, they would not essentially impact, and we'll be able to clean up this area a little bit better. Next slide, please. And in this particular case, we're using essentially all of the farm and cow manure and looking at those resources for fuel and fueling our buses. So not necessarily nature-based solution, but looking at nature and how we work with nature to essentially extract fuel resources to propel our buses. Next slide, please. And last but not the least, I just wanted to mention here that these are some of the questions that are always at the back of our mind now, given the conditions, fiscal situation and conditions that we have. What are the technical requirements? How do we actually make sure that the delivery method is efficient? And then who are the people that we're working with, and how do we fund and finance these different projects? Thank you so much. I have more slides and we can talk about those later on in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. And we'll go straight over to Mark Way from the Nature Conservancy. Mark?
Thank you, Lynn. Hello, everybody. I would like to take a look at the business case for engineering with nature as a coastal risk reduction mechanism and share an example of ensuring a natural asset to protect it so it can continue to protect a local economy and a local community. Next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say that there's been a significant body of research over recent years that really makes a compelling case for nature as an effective mechanism to protect coastal communities, particularly against storm surge and erosion. And the Nature Conservancy itself has been quantifying that value for over 12 years now. And I think you can see here just some of the sort of headlines that you see when you start to research just how effective nature can be as a risk reduction mechanism. A lot of that research has been done in the tropics with interest around coral reefs and mangroves, but also outside of the tropics. I particularly find the study on the right here looking at the protection value of salt marshes in Hurricane Sandy, which estimated that the loss reduction because of having salt marshes in place in that hurricane was something in the region of $600 million. And areas of Maryland and Delaware, the loss was reduced probably by about 30% because of having salt marshes in place. Next slide, please. So I would argue there's a lot of strong evidence that nature should be considered in any conversation about building resilience to coastal communities, but is it cost effective? And I wanted to share this study with you, partly because it came out literally 2 weeks ago. And we looked at that question in the case of mangroves in the Caribbean region. And the team looked at that through a benefit cost lens, comparing the annual avoided damages of having mangroves protecting shorelines, avoided damages of having mangroves protecting shorelines to the cost of restoring them if they were lost due to storm damage or for other reasons. And the results show that over 20 states, territories, and countries in that region, and representing over 3,000 kilometers of coastline, the benefits were equal or above the cost of restoration. And some of the benefits you can see in the diagram on the left side. Some of these were calculated at over 15 times the cost of restoration. So a very, very significant benefit there to keeping mangroves healthy and keeping them in place to protect the coastline. Next slide, please. So I'd like to switch ecosystems and come back to this project I mentioned, which really looked at a product designed to protect a coral reef so that it can continue to protect people and their property. This project resulted in 2019 with a stretch of 160 kilometers of beach and reef being insured against hurricane impacts in the state of Quintana Roo in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And hurricanes are obviously a big issue in that area, but they are particularly a very large short-term risk to reefs, because if a major hurricane hits a reef, you can lose up to 50% or more of the live coral coverage. So the Nature Conservancy, together with the Quintana Roo government and the insurance industry represented by Swiss Re and the tourism sector, they came together to develop a concept of comprehensive coastal zone management. And this concept has three components. One is a dedicated trust fund designed to accept funding from multiple sources to be used for reef and beach maintenance for coastal protection. The other is a parametric insurance policy, which pays out based on wind speed that will be used to repair the reef if it is hit by a hurricane. And the third is the actual capacity to use those funds to make the repairs. And that comes in the form of groups that have been trained to go onto the reef after an event to assess damage and make repairs. And those groups are called reef brigades. And the main reason that this approach was supported by multiple local stakeholders was the strong evidence that could be presented to them, just to show just how much protective value there was from the reef for the local tourist infrastructure, the tourist economy, and the people living in that region. So effectively, what we were doing was protecting the health of the reef so it could be continue to protect the health of the local economy. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I wanted to give you an update on this project because on the 7th of October, Hurricane Delta hit that region. Wind speeds of over 100 knots were recorded, and that meant an insurance payout was made. And within days, the trust fund received something just under $800,000 to go towards the repair of the reef. And you can see here below some pictures from the reef brigades who actually went into action and did some pretty amazing work in the first few days after the hurricane hit. And they will continue to work over the coming months to help that reef recover so it can continue to provide protection. Next slide, please. So I think there is a high level of interest in the use of nature as a risk reduction or climate adaptation mechanism. There's also an interesting amount, a large amount of interest in these kinds of innovative approaches. But if we are really to scale them and to make them have significant impact over regions rather than just local regions, over sort of whole regions globally, then we need to do quite a few things. And I've listed some of those things I think that are really important here. We certainly have to build more capacity at the public and private sector level to enhance understanding of the range of investment benefits you get when you invest in nature. We need to identify revenue streams and develop more conservation financing mechanisms. We need to improve our understanding of how to quantify the benefits of nature in the sense of comparing green and grey approaches, and really have to understand better how we can integrate those approaches for hybrid approaches, combining grey and green. But to do that, we have to find some common metrics to be able to make those comparisons and to understand how which version we should be using in any given circumstances. Any given circumstance. So I think if we can do some of these things over the coming months and years, then we'll be in a much better position to mainstream, I should say, the use of nature-based solutions in climate adaptation and particularly in designing resilience for local communities around our coastlines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Now let's turn straight to John Phillips-Bum from AECOM. John.
Thanks, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here and great to be a part of this. At AECOM is a global multi-service firm. We're increasingly finding ways to incorporate nature-based solutions across disciplines and geographies to address a broad list of challenges that have been identified and talked about earlier today. Next slide. So some of this has been covered, but I thought worth reiterating from our perspective as an implementer, so to speak, representing what we see and hear from the different clients that we work with. And that's really the crux for us. So I think it's important we can talk about all of these different wins that we can get from nature-based solutions, but we really need to see why that plays out on the ground for clients. So just to go over some of these, we've talked a bit about risk reduction benefits. Those are both direct, addressing specific challenges, but also flexible across changing conditions. And I think that's something that we're hearing more and more, is this recognition that kind of traditional gray infrastructure, while appropriate for certain challenges, as conditions change with climate change and just in general, it's important to keep a flexibility, and nature-based solutions can provide that. These next 2 points about providing co-benefits that address other environmental and community objectives, as well as really kind of matching increasing stakeholder demands, I think is really important. So understanding and seeing the wins from nature-based solutions from those benefits. And then as Todd and others have said, there's increasing recognition of the cost-effective nature from nature-based solutions. I add this caveat at the bottom because I think it's really important. Most folks recognize this, but I think it's important to say that nature-based solutions are not a solution to address all challenges, And I think the earlier we kind of agree upon that, the faster we can determine where nature-based solutions do make the best bang for the buck and provide the best value. Next slide, please. So some of this has been covered, and Mark teed this up really well, but I thought it was important to share kind of from our perspective 4 challenges to the increased adoption of nature-based solutions. And I see this starting at a very big picture and then going down to the individual level. So there is a challenge at scale. I mean, some of the challenges that we're talking about addressing, climate change at large, these are very big problems, but extreme weather events, these are very kind of in the moment now and large impact problems. So this concept of right sizing of solutions, both spatially and temporally, is really important. And I think it's going to require both multi-jurisdictional and cross-sector partnerships to really think about how to bring nature-based solutions to the right scale. And so that means public and private sector finding ways, finding geographies in which they share vulnerabilities, in which nature-based solutions could support both entities. And that also gets at this concept of thinking beyond just a pilot in nature-based solutions to address the scale of challenges. The next big point I have is on quantification, and we've heard a bit about this, but I think we've gotten really good at quantifying kind of traditional risk reduction and hazard mitigation. And there's a need to increase our ability to quantify nature-based solutions so that they bring in not just the holistic, the environmental benefits, but also the financial. So again, I think we've improved our ability to quantify and communicate on the non-financial benefits of nature-based solutions. And there's a real need to bring in that financial component and then show those. So show comparables so that we can really make the point of why nature-based solutions are viable in comparison with a more traditional approach. These last 2 points I wanted to bring up are using the term education. In the first sense, I use that term very loosely, but we see a very real need to continue to raise awareness within our clients of nature-based solutions. So again, I think there's been broad adoption of nature-based solutions as both feel goods, so to speak, but also projects that provide visible, natural, environmental, community benefits. But again, capacity building needed on kind of understanding those really core financial benefits. And then I think Chris mentioned this, but this concept of helping clients understand how to ask questions about requesting nature-based solutions. So within procurement and RFPs, requests for proposals, how do nature-based solutions become more commonplace within that? This last point kind of really gets at the individual level. So education of implementers and practitioners. You know, how do we get folks like Todd Bridges speaking to undergrad courses? You know, how do schools really start to embed nature-based solutions within classes of planners, designers, environmental scientists, engineers, so that, you know, nature-based solutions aren't really a niche and an interesting project, but kind of more thought of as a first solution option to certain problems. So this need to really incorporate nature-based solutions within education. And I think that's happening, but there needs to, of course, be a ramping up of that. Next slide. So transitioning and wrapping up into some ways that AECOM is promoting nature-based solutions. And I've also broken this down into 4 categories as well. At a very big picture, we're trying to do our part to promote this through national policy and kind of through federal, you know, promoting what the federal agencies are doing as well. So this first topic is the Natural Infrastructure Initiative, which AECOM is a partner with Caterpillar, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Nature Conservancy, Great Lakes Dredging, and a few others. I think Conservation International recently joined this as well. And this is an opportunity across sectors to promote the value of nature-based solutions in federal legislation and policy. We also find opportunities to promote just the awareness and funding that is coming out of federal agencies like FEMA and HUD that increases opportunities for nature-based solutions. This next category is obviously the biggest one for us, where we're working with clients to implement and raise awareness of nature-based solutions. So some quick examples where we're working with states like Texas and Louisiana to incorporate nature-based solutions within master planning, or working in urban areas like New York City to increase nature-based solutions in urban design, and also through transportation infrastructure projects. Internally, we work hard to have, as a topic, raise awareness amongst the different practitioners through technical practice groups, but also to share where this is being implemented. So demonstrate that this is a request, an increasing request from clients, and make that awareness known, as well as through these funding streams. The final point I'll make is on innovation. I think it's important to know there's this need to push on things like nature-based solutions as opposed to be pulled by them. So how do we, as a community of practitioners, really encourage the adoption of this? And then finally, we're trying to do things through groups like our Natural Capital Laboratory to further prove the value of nature. I'll wrap up and pass back to you, Lynn.
Thank you very much, John. And now we'll go straight to Meg. Meg, over to you.
All right. Welcome. All right. Very excited to talk to you all today. This is changing gears a bit. We're going to really give you a solid case study of engineering with nature. I'd like to just recognize my partner and the owner of this project is Mary Kate Brown with the Nature Conservancy, and she's on today to also answer any questions. And as another point of reference, we've talked a lot about different funding sources, but today this project was funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund. This is part of the settlement with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So just keep that in mind. Let's go to the next slide. And for those on the phone who don't know where Bayou La Battery is, or Lightning Point, this is in the northern Gulf of Mexico. This site is in South Alabama, and if you've ever maybe watched Forrest Gump, it might give you an idea of where this is. This is the seafood capital of Alabama and a very important community site for the seafood fleet. I'm just going to walk you through some of the erosional issues we've had at this site. This is over 100 years ago in 1916 shoreline with this red line. Anna, can you go to the next? And we'll just flick through these. This is 1954, and you can see 1997. Now watch that red dot as we move over the next 20 years. And Anna, you can keep going. 2006 as it retreats, as the shoreline retreats, 2011, 2013. And then I think the next one's 2017. You can stop here, Anna. Oh, go back one. You can see we've lost, quite a bit of shoreline here. And even from the 3 years that we did this before we were able to get this project in ground, this year we had lost another 30 feet of shoreline. And if you can see also in this picture, there's an important boat ramp here and an important community front porch. Next slide. So this is the community part of this project. It was really the goal of the Nature Conservancy to revitalize the locally important waterfront area at Lightning Point by restoring, enhancing, and protecting the shoreline and providing improved community access. So we were really trying to make a community front porch that also had productive shorelines and made it a better spot for people to access. Next slide. And don't forget the natural community that we were also interested in restoring for. Now this was an oil spill project, so we had to make sure we were restoring for those species that were injured by the oil spill. This picture is not one that was considered injured, but we also had subsequent species we wanted to focus on, such as diamondback terrapins and birds. Next slide. And so in the end, the 4 or 5 key project components was shoreline protection, which involved 1.5 miles of breakwater, overlapping segmented breakwaters, and then habitat creation. We did some 40 acres, which is about 16 hectares of marsh and shrub habitat, which was also excavated some 10,000 linear feet of tidal creeks within that marsh. We also wanted to make sure people could access this site in a managed way, so making walking paths and improving the parking lot with LID and green infrastructure components. We also wanted to beneficially use dredge material and as well make a long-term site sustainability plan, which I will discuss later on. Next slide. Oh, it's really slow. Okay, so for the engineers on the phone, this might seem a little overwhelming, but I'm trying to get to the nature part of this slide. We were really had some smart modelers that made sure we used good data to determine how big these breakwaters should be and give the Nature Conservancy an ability to make a cost-benefit analysis and actually a risk on what they wanted to build here as far as a breakwater. And a really important nature part of this is that we knew there was a marsh threshold that these plants could handle as far as wave action, which was some research that's been done here in the Gulf. It's about 0.5 feet of wave. And so in the end, we decided on a 3-foot crest elevation, which means hopefully this site only about 1% of the time would those breakwaters but be exceeded. So let's go to the next slide. Another really cool nature-based part of this project was designing these tidal creeks. And I think sometimes we don't take the time to think about the science behind, the nature behind tidal creeks. And so there was a site right next door to this, which had some tidal creek systems, which we used GIS just to map their sinuosity, their depth, their width. And then next slide, we were able to place this onto our design site. So we had our little tidal creek watersheds, if you would like to call it that really mimic the natural tidal creeks that were just to the west of this project. Very cool little feature. Next slide. And so I'm just going to step through. We were asked to discuss some of the challenges and lessons learned. And we've been trying to implement living shorelines here in the Gulf Coast for almost 20 years with very little money. And out of the bad of the oil spill came really good. And we were able to really put all the things we've learned about living shorelines into this project. Some of the challenges were the community not like, I think all of our panelists today or to now have really talked about this. It's education and why do we need all that marsh? And are you going to flood my property with these breakwaters? So the Nature Conservancy was very good in addressing the community. I'm going to walk through the importance of construction contractors just really quickly with some pictures. And I think even Chris started to talk about this. And we're going to talk about severe storms and designing to a certain risk level. And lastly, long-term sustainability of a project. So we're just going to flip through some pictures of construction. This is a site in construction. We really had good contractors that were local, that cared about the site, that knew that there was a natural bit to this that was very important. Keep going. Next slide. And you can see the tidal creeks coming in. And in the end, we needed to have a revetment that is pretty engineered, but it needed to protect the site. We lost some 30 feet at this site here. Next slide. And if we haven't said it enough, there were 8 severe weather events that hit the Gulf this year. This is a Hurricane Delta just recently hit this site. Just as was said by our last speaker, this was 7.8 feet of water that came into this site. And it has survived all of these storms. So I think it's a testament to the nature of this site and the nature-based design that really helped. And then next. And last but not least is the long-term site sustainability plan was created. This was a framework of adaptive management. So as these sites are hit by storms or in the next 25 years, what can we do to keep the elevation of this site up with sea level rise? And it's a really good little plan that I think the Corps is going to put onto their TLP site, their thin layer placement site. And next. And if you just hit play, Anna, this is the last slide. You can see how we hope this project evolves over the next couple of years as the plants grow. That's my 8 minutes. Thank you. And the last slide just has some websites you can visit just to see some of this construction going on and some of the future vision for what the site would look like. All right, Lynn, I'll turn it back to you.
Fantastic, Meg. Thank you very much. And now for our last panelist, Richard Buggan, and I'm going to turn it straight to you, Richard, from the Nature Conservancy.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and good day to you all. And thank you for the opportunity today to tell you a bit about the Greater Cape Town Water Fund and how we are implementing nature-based solutions to improve water security in the Cape Town region. Now, to encourage the uptake and to motivate for the further use of these nature-based solutions, we have really put in a lot of effort to monitor and to provide evidence of the benefits of these nature-based solutions. So the Greater Cape Town Water Fund is essentially implementing catchment restoration initiatives to improve water security. And the benefits of these restoration initiatives include water replenishment benefits, it includes biodiversity benefits, and social benefits. And in my talk today, I will mainly focus on how we are monitoring the water replenishment benefits. And like the previous speaker, it's more of a practical application. Next slide, please. So we are moving all the way to the southern end of the African continent. So the implementation area for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund falls within the Western Cape water supply system. So this system is sort of a system of dams, aquifers, and interconnect pipelines and treatment facilities which supply water to Cape Town and other surrounding towns, the agricultural sector, and industry. Now, one of the many challenges facing the Western Cape water supply system is the threat of invasive alien vegetation, which cover extensive areas of the strategic water source areas of the Western Cape water supply system. Now, this invasive vegetation, which in this case is mainly pines and acacia species, use significantly more water than the native vegetation which they replace, and thereby negatively impacting on water availability. Additionally, they also threaten biodiversity, as these species outcompete and quickly replace the native fynbos species. So under suitable conditions, once these invasives are removed, this fynbos passively restores. In some cases, however, active restoration is required. So the image on the right is an image taken from one of our catchments in the strategic water source areas. And you can see this catchment is extensively invaded by pines. Next slide, please. So Cape Town recently faced a severe drought and also faced the threat of day zero. And I'm sure many of you have come across this term before. So day zero was essentially a point where the water reticulation system would be shut down and people would have to queue for a daily water allocation. And this really provided motivation for immediate intervention, and thus a suite of alternative water supply options were considered to improve water security in the region. And during this time, the Nature Conservancy also completed a business case for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, which provided clear and compelling evidence for investment in nature-based solutions. It showed that nature-based solutions is the most cost-effective and sustainable option for long-term water security. Now, this business case estimated that the removal of these thirsty invasive alien plants in 7 high-priority sub-catchments, which is mainly located around the major dams in the area, could reclaim 55 billion liters per year, and this is about 14 billion gallons per year. Next slide, please. So as part of this business case, we used hydrological models to estimate that we could reclaim this 55 billion liters per year. And you can say at sort of current day usage in Cape Town, that's about 2 months of additional water for Cape Town. So this water could be reclaimed by clearing all the invasives across these 7 high priority subcatchments. So an intermediate goal, one of the intermediate goals for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund was to reclaim the loss of this water by 2025. It's a 6-year period through implementing effective invasive vegetation clearing activities. So through this hydrological models that were applied as part of the business case, we are able to provide initial estimates of the water reclamation benefits of our work. However, these estimates are subject to uncertainties, and for this reason, we have implemented physical catchment experiments to provide additional validation. Next slide, please. So as part of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, we have initiated long-term paired catchment experiments, and we chose 2 experimental designs. And these are the before-after control impact, which is or the BACI, and the multiple catchment experimental designs. And very importantly, and the reason why we selected these is that they clearly allow for attribution of the impacts of our attribution to the impacts of the interventions that we apply. So to identify these catchments, we conducted an extensive catchment selection exercise, which was both desktop and field-based. The catchment selection criteria included accessibility, which is very important as these are long-term experiments. And we looked at catchment physical properties. And each catchment or watershed, we are monitoring rainfall and discharge, and this is across 6 watersheds. So just a bit about the BACI experiment. So the BACI experiment includes a before and after period, and a control and an impact watershed. So in the before period, both of these watersheds are in a similar state, and in this case, they're invaded by these invasive pines. And during this before period, baseline data are collected. Then an intervention is applied, and in this case, is the removal of the invasives, is applied in the impact catchment, and monitoring continues during this after period. And essentially what you aim to see is during the after period, you aim to observe an increase in the stream flow or discharge in the impact catchment. But as I said, we also incorporated a multiple catchment experiment, which includes also a before and after period. But in addition to the control and the impact catchment, it also includes a reference catchment. So in this case of the multiple catchment experiment, during the after period, you hope to observe sort of convergence in the hydrological conditions from towards the reference conditions. And so for these catchment experiments, at this stage, we envisage a 3-year of before data and 3 years of after data. But this period will be reevaluated as data becomes available. Next slide, please. So these experiments were initiated in October 2019, and here I'm presenting about 10 months of preliminary discharge data from 2 experimental catchments. And as I mentioned, we have 6 experiments running. So both these catchments are currently invaded as we are in the before intervention monitoring period. So when you look at the data, you will notice that there are variations in terms of the magnitudes of the peak in the discharge data. But this is not the only characteristic we are considering, because we are able to sort of account for variations in magnitude by considering the size of these catchments. More importantly, is that we are looking at for these catchments to exhibit similar conditions in terms of their hydrological response. And I think if you look at these 2 graphs, this is clearly evident. And these catchments are on a parallel path in terms of the hydrological response. And this is very encouraging for these experiments going forward. Next slide, please. So I think overall, providing evidence of the benefits of nature-based solutions has encouraged uptake and further implementation. So for example, the local municipality in Cape Town has committed additional funding to catchment restoration as part of their new water strategy, which was released after the drought. And they have also included the benefits of invasive vegetation clearing in future water augmentation plans. And really, sometime in the future, I have to share more information with you as the experiments progress. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Richard. So now to the participants, the audience, let's open up for questions. We do have some that have come into the chat, and I'm going to start with a couple of those that have risen to the top, that has gotten votes. So first question, and really this is directed to anyone. Several people have commented that these are excellent case examples, and wondering how to get engineering schools, and in one case it was road engineering schools, but I think it applies to all engineering schools. How does one get engineering schools to use these types of examples and these types of measures, and especially in the context of the Global South? So anybody want to chime in? Richard, and you need to unmute.
There. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, good.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Yeah, I wanted to say something about that, and also tie it to another question about how do you get these ideas spreading more in the Global South. So, you know, let me just start with that part. And it is, I gave an example from Costa Rica, which is a country in which is very focused on, has been very focused on nature. And Australia, maybe that's not part of the Global South, but Australia is one of the world leaders in road ecology. You know, we've got lots of mitigations, a very wide diversity of them. And there's some really good people there that work in that field. Brazil is has been sort of the center for road ecology in South America, and at Lavras in Minas Gerais. They have a conference. I gave a talk just, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago on they have these annual conferences. And very impressive people will come. And then finally, and we just heard something from South Africa, which is wonderful. But you know, for decades, Botswana was a leader in protecting wildlife, worldwide leader in many ways. What I'm leading to then is to get specific local cases where there's some success is probable. And I want to give just one example. It's not a global south example, it's a China example. But I was consulting in China where there are new expressway systems many years ago. And we went to a place where the streams were flooding. There were a lot of floods in the streams, and the farmers didn't like that, and the development downstream didn't like that. So what they had done was to find where the roads crossed the stream, the hill went up, and there's a road ditch, and the ditch went straight down the hill to the stream. So what they had done is convert the road ditch into sort of strips of gravel. I mean, it was more than that, but and anyway, the province head of the province transportation agency and I did a big high five there. It was most amusing because it was such a simple-minded thing. But what I'm leading to is if you're living in that community or you're living, you're a farmer or whatever, and you're having flooding, look for simple examples like that. And now that leads me to something that I think these examples have been wonderful today, collaboration between engineers and ecologists writ large has so many benefits. And these were examples, but one of the other benefits is you can, at the end of a project, you can go to the press and the press will come out and see the success and the transportation agency, the natural resource agency, the nonprofit organization, and the academics and others, it can all stand there in front of the camera, and the public likes it, builds public support, but also the engineering schools, I don't want to say schools, but the engineering community really like this. They see that they're broader, doing more than just efficiency and safety, the main goals of transportation, surface transportation. And
Richard, I'm going to ask if you wrap up, so because we have a lot of other questions, I want to be sure we get to those.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Is that good? There are a number of questions about finance. And so I'm just going to aggregate them and say sort of two dimensions to the financing questions. One is many of the examples show that there are widely dispersed benefits. That is, there are perhaps the coastal restoration benefits, but then there might be ecological benefits, there might be fishing community benefits, and yet agencies that oversee and may pay for the infrastructure are siloed. And so how do you sort of combine the interests of all those agencies that are siloed to get perhaps shared funding? So that's one finance question. And then the other is just a much broader based question of, are there particular challenges or opportunities for financing these engineering with nature solutions? So anybody want to respond, and try to keep your response crisp so we can continue to other questions.
Yeah, very quickly, Lynn, thank you so much for the question and for that person who asked. So very quickly, one is, there's a lot of conversation about debt and financing, green bonds, sustainability bonds. In our particular case, the state is consolidating and coordinating with different jurisdictions here. The other one we have applied, I didn't have time to talk about this earlier, is that we have been monetizing a lot of our environmental benefits here in our agency. And those environmental benefits are essentially sold in the open market and reinvested back, into the projects. As an offshoot of that, the third and final part I just want to mention here is, you can create, local credit markets, if you may, wherein each one of those jurisdictions can trade, say, water benefits with another jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to offer those three.
Great, thank you, Chris. Anyone else? Todd?
Lynn? Yeah, Lynn, my succinct response would be policy. And, the infrastructure historically has been a complete, public policy-driven financing arrangement. And And I think there needs to be a close examination of this. I mean, we have different agencies responsible for different portions of infrastructure being handled by different committees, for example, on Capitol Hill. And we need to consider whether or not policy, and I think there are probably examples of which it is creating obstacles for more creative financing and joint investment in solutions. And I would also point to the private sector as well. Companies have policies that either recognize or don't recognize particular kind of benefit streams relevant to their business and their bottom line. So there's a lot of parallel between, I think, the public and the private side of things in respect to policies that are driven for financing. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And I think I'll take the moderator's prerogative and add a couple of other examples. One thing we've seen, certainly in the United States, is interagency partnerships where these projects are providing benefits relative to the mission of each agency. So example number one, Portland, Oregon, the municipal water managing entity needed to bring stream temperatures down, needed to reduce heat levels, and could have done that by investing directly in refrigeration systems on wastewater effluent and so forth, but instead partnered with a farm agency, a farm conservation agency, in a 37-mile investment in natural infrastructure and streamside vegetation restoration, good for the farms, relevant to the farm conservation agency and soil and sedimentation erosion, but good for the municipality as well. There's a number of those, and so finding those marriages of co-benefits can be very helpful. Anybody else want to comment on the finance issue? So let me move on. There's also a number of questions that really pertain to kind of going from pilots or once in a while opportunities to having these approaches be more systematic and more systematically considered. And in some respects, Richard's response earlier relates to that, but I wonder if any of the others of you have comments on it, including maybe in the private sector.
Maybe, Lynn, I could just offer a couple of comments. I think I wouldn't underestimate the value of those pilot projects, because if we have new models, we have to show that they actually work. So we have to take them beyond the concept phase. But I think fundamentally, what we have to do is just show that they are good investments, that they are value for money, because so many of the governments and organizations we're speaking to, they are not flush with huge budget surpluses. They are looking at allocating very scarce resources. So we have to be able to show the value of the investments. And I think that goes to a point you probably made right at the beginning of the session, was showing the full range of value. So if you invest in a coral reef or mangroves just because you want the protection value, you're actually getting a lot more than that with that investment. So I think enhancing understanding of that, having these metrics to be able to compare it, so we can actually see the value between an option of a pure gray solution or a pure green or a hybrid. I think all of those issues we can't overlook, because they are pieces of the puzzle that we need to fit together to actually get these approaches mainstreamed.
Chris, looks like you have a response as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, in a different perspective, a lot of these pilots are great. They're out there, but sometimes the jurisdiction itself, in our particular case here in California and LA, jurisdiction itself may not have the workforce capacity to actually look through, sort through, and implement, those pilots. So it's not only the financial part, but the individuals who are looking at these and may not necessarily have the technical skill set. So collaboration is really key to this as well, and allowing other organizations, especially those who are detached from these resources, other organizations, to be able to facilitate, like TNC, facilitate, these types of pilots be implemented, in other places where they may not be able to be implemented. So.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to turn maybe to Meg or others on this same kind of finance question. I mean, how do you get the support to finance these efforts? And particularly if there's a cost premium on some of the initial efforts, even if there are broad benefits spread over, many different agencies and people and communities. Meg, do you have any thoughts on that as you've worked on those in the Gulf Coast?
Yeah, we get a little bit different situation because we've had a flush of funding with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So we're very flush with that, but we hope that the things that we learn can be applied across the country or the world to make things more efficient. With the project with Lightning Point, we also did a net ecosystem services benefit analysis with that also helped the funder understand that with that project, you're going to get over $63 million in ecosystem services. So some of that kind of analysis, I think, helps what was just said, that drive home that these things have a bigger role to play in the environment. I don't know if I answered your question. John might have some as well.
John, quick comment, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I think these are all great points. I would just say that I think we need to expand our thinking about what public-private partnerships can mean. And I think recognizing that we should be thinking about this not as how private sector looks at nature-based solutions and how public sector does, but how both of those share a lot of areas of shared vulnerability. And by pooling resources between the two, we open up the doors a lot more to kind of scaled opportunities of implementing nature-based solutions.
Great, and I regret that our time is already up. I want to make just a few summary comments. First of all, thank you to all the participants. Really great presentations, very tangible, very specific, and there are a lot of questions still in the Q&A box, some of which are very, very specific. So perhaps all the panelists I could invite to take a look at those and see if they can provide additional responses. But I think you've all heard that the potential is great. The reality is there. At the same time, there are lots of opportunities to catalyze engineering with nature through some policy underpinnings, through some innovative financing of the sort that Mark Way described with insurance, and just through further monitoring and evaluation so that we better understand what is the performance that is delivered. Lots of questions about that social interface, that is, how does this benefit people and what is their perspective on these solutions? So I'm going to end with those comments and turn over to Ryan Bartlett to close the session and also to remind everyone there's some more sessions coming up. So thank you all.
Great, thanks so much, Lynn. Thank you to the more than 350 attendees that stuck around for this at our maximum. That's a fantastic audience. Just to remind you that indeed, this is the fourth in a series of 6 total discussions, really focusing around infrastructure and nature. We have one more in 2 weeks around balancing ecological connectivity and linear infrastructure, really going deep on, for example, the presentation that Richard gave us with some great examples. And then we will close in December, at least this first run of webinars, really stitching all of these sessions together to talk about ramifications for the IUCN World Conservation Congress and the now delayed super year that was supposed to be 2020, but will likely be in 2021, with different policy discussions in climate and biodiversity and other important international fora. So thank you so much for joining us for another great session. If you want to find out more information, you can go to this website, www.iene.info, where you will see recorded videos of each of the webinars, including this one, which should be uploaded in the next few days. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.